Going on YouTube? Hope you're doing well today, and I want to welcome you to my first video on my YouTube channel. My name is Brendini, and I wanted to talk about controversy surrounding IGN and their, honestly, in my opinion, terrible take on why Resident Evil 5 should not have a remake. I personally think it's just an awful take, and as the video progresses, I'll pause periodically to explain that. So without further ado, let's get right into it.
With Resident Evil 4's release last year, Capcom's project to remake the glory years of its survival horror series is complete. But as the game's post-credit scene suggests, the remakes aren't over. And so the big question is, where next? The obvious answer is a remake of Resident Evil 5. But on the game's 15th anniversary, it's clear that moving forward chronologically will take Capcom's remakes into the series' weakest era, an era of gameplay and narrative decisions best left in the past.
I think a lot of people would probably consider Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6 to be the two worst games in the entire franchise. I, for one, would disagree about Resident Evil 5. I personally believe it to be the best, and it's my favorite, which is another reason why this video kind of irritates me, because he nitpicks a lot and really picks and chooses things that he doesn't like in Resident Evil 5, but is okay for other Resident Evil. The things I like about 5 would be the story. The story's good. The single player is good. Co-op is good. The DLC is good. Mercenaries is amazing. I can't touch too much on the PvP because I never really played it. But overall, Resident Evil 5 is a fantastic game.
Resident Evil 5 simply can't be remade, at least not to the standards of Capcom's best work. And so
that's an absolutely stupid thing to say. It's just so dumb. Such a dumb thing to say.
The answer is not to remake, but to rewrite. Resident Evil is a survival horror series. Not that you'd know that playing Resident Evil 5. Sure, it features...
Not that you would know that playing Resident Evil 4 either, because of most of the things that he talks about not liking in 5 came from 4. A lot of the gameplay mechanics he doesn't like and gameplay elements came from 4. And he nitpicks them in 5 without ever acknowledging the fact that they came from 4. He acknowledges, like, further into the video, he acknowledges the fact that Resident Evil 4 started the action, but completely ignores certain parts of the game to, I think, purposely make 5 look worse.
Is a constant flow of horrific imagery, but Resident Evil 5 is an action game through and through. That's
true.
Evident in its cover shooting mechanics, vehicle chases with on-rails turret sequences, and the constant rattle of assault rifles. Even its visual design evokes the sandy shades of modern military games that experienced mass popularity in the late 2000s. It all speaks to a series that had lost its way. Rather than reflect on the tenets that were the foundation of its experience, Resident Evil 5 looked to the contemporary gaming zeitgeist in an attempt to find a new lease of life. The result is an unholy hybrid of Resident Evil, Gears of War, and Call of Duty. It's as ugly and unwieldy as it sounds. This design appears to not just be a misguided attempt to follow Western successes, but also a misreading of its predecessor. With Resident Evil 4, director Shinji Mikami deftly reinvented the series through the use of a new over-the-shoulder camera angle. The perspective allowed for a more kinetic, action-heavy game. Despite this, Mikami never lost sight of the terror at the core of Resident Evil. Through the use of enemies that were strategically placed to provide undulating waves of tension and fear, and the inclusion of Ashley as your vulnerable charge, combat encounters were focused on...
I love that line. I love that line for one simple reason. He says Ashley is part of the reason that makes the game scary. He's absolutely right. She doesn't make the game scary because she follows you around and you have to protect her. She makes the game scary because of how terrible she is to have following you around for hours on end. Not any other reason than that. And to call Resident Evil 4 a survival horror game and also in the same breath say Resident Evil 5 isn't, doesn't make any sense.
Surviving overwhelming horrors rather than dominating foes. Resident Evil 5, meanwhile,
let me stop. Let me play the video.
While presents its enemies as waves to be gunned down with increasingly powerful weaponry. Their purpose is
waves to be gunned down with increasingly powerful weaponry. What game did that start in? Oh wait, Resident Evil 4, where you could upgrade guns, get unlimited ammo guns. Like, this guy, he nitpicks certain things, but ignores them about Resident Evil 4. You're telling me you weren't going around gunning down every single enemy in Resident Evil 4 with the RPG and the Tommy gun? I think you're lying.
Cannon fodder, a wall of meat to slow your progress through levels.
Mhm.
And those levels
Same
are
with
not
Resident Evil 4.
locations to be explored. Instead,
Absolutely.
they are largely funnels that push you from entrance to exit.
That's true. I'll touch
Resident
more on
Evil
this in a
4 may have
second.
replaced the series' traditional continuous structure with discrete levels in an attempt to move away from the backtracking-heavy design of previous games, but it preserved the spirit of locations like the Raccoon City police station. The
Not
village,
really.
Salazar's
It really didn't.
castle, and the island feature interlocking, explorable pathways that solidify these locations as authentic spaces rather than obstacle courses. Resident Evil 5 has no interest in this, with the majority of its stages being little more than corridors peppered with dead ends to hide treasures in. Their lack of authenticity means no one will ever mention the Kijuju Autonomous Zone in the same breath as the Spencer Mansion.
I could tell you nobody is mentioning Salazar's castle in the same breath as Spencer's mansion either. And to say that Resident Evil 5 simply funnels you through while Resident Evil 4 doesn't is a bit hypocritical, because I could go through both games. Matter of fact, you could pick me out any game in the series, and I could go through points where it has more of an open environment and where it funnels you through. Because even at its best, let's take the first game, right? It's a big mansion, right? You can explore all sorts of directions. You basically have the freedom to go any ways you want, as long as you either have the key or it's unlocked already. But in the same way that Resident Evil 5 funnels you, Resident Evil 1, 2, 3, and 4, they all funnel you. Because in the mansion, yes, you can go to room to room to room, but you're being funneled through an endless corridors and hallways that are funneling you to where you need to be. It's the same thing in every single game in Resident Evil 4. Yeah, the areas are open, but is there really anything to them other than some herbs, some, gold, maybe one of the amulets you gotta shoot? You still end up funneled one direction, and I could pick a point in Resident Evil 5 in the same way where it's open and you have all these extra things you can search and all these extra ways you can go. But every single Resident Evil game funnels you in one way or another. Yes, in the first one, and the second one, and even the third one, you have more freedom in a way, because you can go what way you want to go. You can get lost more easily. You're still being funneled through these corridors. So, I mean, he's nitpicking what is basically a part of Resident Evil as a whole.
All this is to say that a faithful remake of Resident Evil 5 would break Capcom's 7-year streak of brilliant survival horror games.
What a
it's
stupid
telling
thing
that
to
the
say.
series' reset point, Resident Evil 7, was a reinvention of the very first game, a haunted house that grew ever larger as you unlocked new rooms by solving its puzzles. Clever reinventions of this base conceit is the key to Resident Evil's success, be that dropping an unstoppable force into the house's corridors, such as Resident Evil 2's Mr. X, or expanding
I love that he's using Resident Evil 2 gameplay, because it proves my point. You're being funneled. He's got a lot of space. He could go down the steps. He could go down this way, this hall that he's going down right now. He can go down the other hall. He can go down the other steps. He can go through the door down on the right side down there. He can go through the left side. At the end of the day, it's all funneling him to where he needs to go. It's just more liberty in the older games versus Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 5, where they pretty much funnel you exactly where you need to be.
the scope of the house. Resident Evil Village's titular location.
I can't speak on Village. I never played it. It's the only one in the main series that I haven't played. But I assume that is probably much of the same. So I don't know. I can't speak on it. Like I said, I would just assume it's similar in the way the other games are.
Is effectively a giant manor. Its corridors are streets, and its rooms are houses. Resident Evil 5's stage-driven structure is simply inferior to this design. A modern recreation of it would only further highlight its flaws, especially coming in such close proximity to masterclasses like the remake of Resident Evil 2.
I think if you look at the Resident Evil series as a whole, after Resident Evil 2, it started to really get more and more funneled as the games went on. And then when it hit 7, it kind of broke that loop. And so, while I think 7 is still funneled, very funneled, and 8 is very fun. Sorry, I can't say 8 is funneled. I never played it. I'm assuming 8 is also funneled in the same way 7 is. Even though they went very funneled, and then they're breaking out to be more like the original. So it's just the formula they've had for building the environments within Resident Evil.
Remakes can, of course, completely redefine the structure of their source material. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, for example, is recognisably an updated version of the classic RPG, but its world design and gameplay mechanics are a world apart from the 1997 original, and so you could argue that Resident Evil 5 is actually the Resident Evil most in need of a remake. A whole new environmental structure and scenario design that reigns in the
I don't actually think Resident Evil 5 needs a remake. I think it should get a remake. I don't think it needs one in the same way you could say Code Veronica or Resident Evil 0 or Resident Evil 6 need a remake because Code Veronica and 0 are they're just older. So a remake would bring them new life and breathe new life into the games. Resident Evil 6 needs a remake on the other end because it's got a a mountain of issues that could be fixed and just turn that game into a way better game. So, I mean, Resident Evil 5, I think, is the one of the remaining games that doesn't need a remake. It should get one to improve upon it.
Action and dials up the horror would bring it in line with Capcom's other remakes. But all of this doesn't account for Resident Evil 5's most notorious problem. Racism. Set in a fictional West African country, Resident Evil 5's primary antagonists are black people. Yes, it's technically the Ouroboros.
It's in Western Africa, so that's where a lot of black people live. So it makes sense. Would you prefer they fill the entire, cast with white people and have it be in Africa and you see nothing but white people?
Virus that protagonist Chris Redfield is fighting. But the parasite's host is depicted as a nation of mobs and primitives who are violent even before their infection. Intentionally or not,
So the nation isn't depicted as primitive. This part of the game, the marshlands, the ruins, I think they could absolutely be changed. I think if you took the war paint and the shields and the spears and just the primitive clothing off of them, it doesn't change anything. It's the same thing. Not only that, these people aren't primitive. There's lore in the game. I'll post it up on screen so you guys can see it. There's lore in the game that explains why they're wearing the clothes and the war paint and using spears and shields. But I think you could take that lore out of the game and it changes absolutely nothing for the game. Matter of fact, I know you could take that out of the game. You could put them in normal clothes. You could dress them like the other people in the game. Doesn't change anything. Period. And I think not only can they do that, I think they should do that because I can see why this part of the game could be considered problematic. It's in my opinion definitely one of the parts that you could look at and you could say, wow, that is a crazy way to look at the people of Africa because Africa is a big place. First of all, Africa is a huge, big ass continent with many, many countries. Some are more modernized and some are less modernized. So you're going to find parts of the country that differ extremely because of how big it is and how many people live on the continent. So I think to say the game is racist, one, because it's in Africa, doesn't make any sense. Resident Evil has been worldwide. And two, I think they could fix the most problematic parts of the game and it wouldn't change anything about the actual game itself.
Resident Evil 5 positions Africa as the Dark Continent, an uncivilized world harboring a diseased population that needs gunning down via Western intervention.
Like I said, they've had, Resident Evil is a huge franchise. It's been in North America, it's been in Europe, it's been in Asia, it's been in Africa, obviously. It's been all over the world. So where they go, if they go to Africa, it's going to be African people. If they go to, North America, it's going to be American people. If they go to Europe, it's going to be European people. If they go to Asia, it's going to be Asian people. They can't base it on a continent and then use people from other continents or not use people from that continent. It doesn't make any sense.
In the name of global security. This insensitive treatment of people of colour was hotly debated even as early as Resident Evil 5's debut trailer, with writers such as Ngai Kroll and Stephen Totilo pointing out the game's uncomfortable post-colonial imagery. The arguments and think pieces continued well into the game's release window, with IGN's own former editor-in-chief Hilary Goldstein having also wrestled with the subject. But that was 2009, a time when race was apparently a
in 2009, when IGN rated this game, they rated it a 9 out of 10. I don't think they battled with it that much.
Debate rather than a reality. In the 2020s, in a post-Black Lives Matter world, there is only one acceptable response to a white man shooting waves of Africans for an entire video game. No. Remakes may be able to redefine their source material, but there's only so many changes you can make until it's not a remake at all, but an entirely new game. And if you take Africa out of Resident Evil 5, is it Resident Evil 5 anymore? Even with a vastly improved...
You don't have to take Resident Evil 5 out of Africa in any way. Like I already said, you can change this whole area, you can change the models of the enemies you're killing, you can change the scenery, you can change the houses, and it doesn't change anything about the lore of the game, the way the game goes. It doesn't change anything about the game at all. They can completely change this whole area, and it's the same game. It's probably even a better game at that.
More sensitive take on the continent, perhaps one with a black protagonist and a more empathetic look at the outbreak, the experience would simply...
One with a black protagonist. As he shows the black protagonist you play as in Resident Evil 5. I don't know if he means take out Chris, which he probably does, but he answered his own question because Chev is a great character. You have Josh Stone, who's a great character. I think he's really nitpicking what he wants to make the game look bad. So I can just tell by the way this guy talks about the games that he's never played them. He's not a Resident Evil fan. He's never played the games. So why is he reporting on them and making this horrible, awful, waste of time video?
Be too divorced from the original to hold the name Resident Evil 5. So where does Capcom go now? Personally, if I'd look backwards, Code Veronica is an ideal candidate, as is the original Resident Evil. But if the only way...
OG Resident Evil does not need a remake. It has a brilliant remake. Yes, it's a little less modernized in comparison to 2 and 3. But the RE remake is still a masterclass remake, and it doesn't need to have anything done to it further. As for Code Veronica, I already said I think Code Veronica needs a remake just because updating it and bringing it to modern technology would really breathe new life into that game. And then the same thing for Zero. I think Zero kind of falls in the same boat as the RE remake, but not as much because it has its own share of problems. But yeah, I mean, I think they don't touch the first Resident Evil game. Perfectly fine how it is. It was perfect move for them to skip it and go straight to remaking 2. The first one doesn't need a remake. The remake is a brilliant game.
Way is chronologically forward, then a total rewrite of what comes next is the logical path. Because what followed
Total re-rate makes 0 sense.
Resident Evil 4 was not one terrible game, but 2. Resident Evil 6 doubled down...
Worst game in the series by far.
Tripled down on the action-packed, set-piece heavy shooter design. To the extent
this
that
one
much
needs
of
a
it could be
remake to
mistaken
fix a
for
lot
a
of the issues it
third-person Call of
has.
Duty spin-off were it not for the monsters. Its restrictive level design practically puts you in a chokehold, forcing you to endure a barrage of bombastic moments that have no interest in evoking any sense.
This game does suck, though, and needs quality of life. Like, quality of life remakes to it, so...
of fear. Resident Evil 6 is a survival horror, only in that it's a horrible game that you have to survive playing. But this time around...
Same way in the fact that Resident Evil 4 is survival horror in the way that Ashley is a horrible character to have following you around for 2 hours.
It doesn't have to be like that. Capcom now has the opportunity to ignore the past and completely reinvent this chunk of the timeline. In Resident Evil 4
They don't
Remake's
need to
post-credit
reinvent it.
scene, evil
It doesn't make
mastermind
sense.
Albert Wesker details his plans for world domination to Ada Wong. Reflected in his glasses is an image of Excella Gione and the Stairway of the Sun, 2 significant plot elements from Resident Evil 5, which indicates Capcom's intentions. But there's more to consider. This scene is largely a replication of the sequence from Assignment Ada, a non-canon chapter from the original Resident Evil 4. 4. Its shift from unofficial to canon points to a willingness to change. Furthermore, the end of this scene is completely rewritten. When learning of Wesker's plans, rather than dutifully deliver the stolen Las Plagas sample to him, Ada betrays her shadowy boss and forces her helicopter to turn around. In this moment, the future of Resident Evil becomes unclear. Capcom has given itself the freedom to do whatever it wants. I just hope it's not a remake of Resident Evil 5.
Man, this video sucks. You know, this video really blows. And it upsets me because, like I said already, like Resident Evil is a big, you know, it's pretty much it's a big part of my life because it was such a big part of my childhood. I remember playing Resident Evil 2 on the Nintendo 64 and beating it with my mom, playing Resident Evil 1 on the PS1 and grinding Resident Evil 4 like as kids beating Resident Evil 4 multiple times in one day because we played it so much. And then Resident Evil 5 in 2009, I played the hell out of that game. I have more hours in Resident Evil 5 than any other Resident Evil, guaranteed. It's by far my favorite. I already said there's some qualities, but I'm going to name them again. It's got a great story, doesn't need rewritten. It's got amazing single player. It's little lackluster because Sheva kind of behaves the same way Ashley does. Like the AI in the games are pretty stupid. Um, it's got amazing co-op. The co-op is amazing. You know, you go in and I always played Sheva and my friend always played Chris. But you guys going together and it's just the most fun experience you could ever have. And then you have the mercenaries, amazing. And like I said, I can't judge the multiplayer, but the DLC is amazing. You have Albert Wesker, who's one of the best villains of all time. He's such an amazing villain. But you could take all these amazing elements plus the bad elements of the game. You could fix it and change it and show why I believe that Resident Evil 5 is truly the most underrated game in the entire series. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much all I have. I wanted to go over, you know, why I think his views and his points in the video are bad. And I hope I did a good job doing so. This is my first video, so I didn't write a script. I just kind of rambled my thoughts out. It kind of helped that I had to reshoot the video 4 times because I kind of got to get some idea of what I wanted to say going into certain points. But please let me know down below if there's things I could improve upon when I'm talking, when I'm trying to state my points, or if you have a different opinion about certain things I said. Like, please let me know down below. But yeah, like I said, that's all I got for you guys. If you made it to this far in the video, though, please do me a favor. I stream every single day on TikTok. It's the only platform I stream on right now because my computer's a bit older, so it doesn't like multi-streaming. But if you get the chance, please check out the link tree down below. My TikTok will be in there. Like I said, I'm live every day, starting at 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. And then on the weekends, I go live during the day. So once again, thank you guys for watching, and hopefully I'll see you guys in another video. Peace.